like we need to come back together. So I want to thank you all, and I could tell from the tables I stopped at, this was a conversation that all of you really entered into, and you were all teachers and learners, which is the way it always works. But I'd like to turn now to our panelists, and in reverse order, so starting with Robin, and then Abbot James in the middle, and then Sister Donald. I'd like to just pose the question of, based on the conversations you heard and any kind of distilling thoughts that have come to you at the conclusion of this year's symposium, what will you be taking back to your life and work from this, or what questions will resound in your mind at the end of this? Because it may be a question, and the questions are every bit as important or more important than the answers. So what stays with you? Robin?
From here? I had the privilege of being part of some very rich discussions, and from what I could tell from other tables too, that was all going on. So I'm just very grateful to all of you for the engagement this morning. I think I was struck, there was a similar theme at three tables I sat at, and that is a matter of finding balance in different areas of one's life and in the themes that have been brought up today. But there's always this tension. And at one table it was the tension between being and doing, or silence and contemplation and action, and how do we strike the balance in our lives between those tensions. And another, it was the tension between centeredness and the ability to be nimble or flexible. If we are so rooted, can we become so rigid that we lose sight of where the tip of the arrow is, where the Sister Donna was talking about, where the fire and the activity is, where, as someone said, where the eccentrics are. And many of our saints were the eccentrics. They were at the tip of the arrow pushing, and how do we strike that balance between rootedness and being the tip of the arrow? And then I've just lost my train of thought of what we were talking about at the last table, but it was the same kind of thing in terms of tensions, and it's a dilemma. And I think what I'll take away from this morning is to be more aware and more intentional about those tensions and conflicts, and how do I balance that in my own life through making the time for discernment of when I should be still and when I should be active, when I should be very centered, when I should be pushing the envelope. And any help and guidance that you can give me in all that, I would certainly appreciate.
I was only at 2 tables, and a lot of what Robin just said came up in my tables as well. I think the most striking theme was the desire to be with others who cherish the Benedictine way, and not always knowing exactly how to find that kind of community as a layperson. A desire, if possible, to have even weekly meetings of some such group, and the hope that something practical might come out of that, even out of the discussion this morning. to me, it isn't all that, or it shouldn't be all that difficult to find a place if a group of people really desires this, because having a physical place regularly to meet is surely important. So that was I think the issue that was discussed at greatest length. Related to that is how attractive the whole Benedictine notion of balance is to so many people. That in our distracted lives and in our often distractible personalities, the Benedictine way does provide a kind of emotional, spiritual, mental stability. At one of the tables, he rather humorously mentioned the Chinese fortune cookie that had the phrase, "Balance is more than not falling down." And I think that's worth keeping in mind. You know, it's, that balance has a very positive value, and we Benedictines have it. I said at one of our tables that in a way it's easier for me because I've got the strict terrarium in the monastery. For those who live without that more strict terrarium, it's more of a challenge. But it's certainly a challenge that's worth meeting, and perseverance is so important in all of that. So those are the things that struck me the most.
I think that I come away with a sense of a greater need to translate Benedictine wisdom to the everyday lives of ordinary Christians. And the insights that came up and the questions that came up at the tables I visited were really wonderful insights and very provocative. At the first table, there was a mention of the fact that young people today are, where they're rooted is in the technology, in the whirlwind, you know, and they're almost, you know, addicted to it and don't know how to move out of it. So how do we bring young people to, you know, a deeper sense of rootedness other than just the whirlwind itself? Or how do we bring ourselves to a sense of being centered in the midst of the whirlwind? That's the big challenge, I think. It's not just creating a quiet center at the center of the cyclone, but also hearing God in the whirlwind, very important. There's one final thing I'd like to share with you, and that is, since Father James talked about Dorothy Day as a wonderful example, I lived for a year at the Catholic Worker, the first year I did graduate work at Fordham in New York City. And believe me, Dorothy was a tremendous example of interiority, prayer, commitment to what we would call Lectio, for example. I'd bring her mail every morning, and I'd find her in bed. You know, she was older when I knew her, probably late 70s, propped up on pillows, knees up, and Bible on her knees, and she'd read Scripture and pray with Scripture for maybe 2 hours every morning. Well, she was less active and busy in those days, but this is where she got her insight, her refreshment, her energy, and so on. But she and Peter Morin, who founded the Catholic Worker Movement, had something called the Easy Essays, which you may know. And one of them is on Benedictine wisdom, and they summarize the Benedictine integration as 3 C's: cult, culture, and cultivation. And I think all of those elements could be brought into your lives, and probably are already. Cult meaning liturgy, but also in a broad sense, prayer, you know, the spiritual nourishment of our life. Culture meaning culture in the broad sense, but study and Lectio Divina, that kind of enrichment, using our mind. And then the last one, cultivation, and classically that meant in monasteries agriculture. The farmer, you know, the Benedictines were involved in agriculture and husbandry and so forth. But in an extended sense, it's right livelihood, as the Buddhists talk about it, using our work as a spiritual discipline. So cult, culture, and cultivation. It's a way of talking about body, mind, spirit integration. It's all there in the Benedictine tradition and needs to be translated into your lives.
Okay, well, many thanks to all three of you and to all of you. You've together created a really rich symposium this year, and I think the discussions are ones that almost by nature have to be continued on and on. So I hope all of you have ways of continuing those conversations. Before we close, I just want to especially thank some people that made this symposium what it was. It takes a lot of work and planning, and so I want to start with thanking my friend and colleague and Vice Chairman James Schubert, who wisely as far as I'm concerned, maybe unwisely for her, she volunteered to sort of take the lead in managing the logistics and the how to make it happen side of this. And what she did was considerable and hugely appreciated. I also want to thank Rachel Pacheco and Diana Dick, working in the office, who were taking your reservations and getting the publicity out, and also doing the really important stuff that made this happen. So I declare the second annual Symposium on Benedictine Spirituality at its natural end. As I say, the conversations continue, and I look forward to seeing you all for the third annual Symposium on Benedictine Spirituality next year. Thank you for being here.